No mai, hoki mai e te iwi. We hope you enjoyed the last session with Te Puna Kāhui. We received more questions than we could ask within the time frame. However, rest assured that we will collate them all and forward them through to Te Puna Kāhui. This afternoon, we are continuing our discussion on Shift 2, which is mobilising communities, with a discussion by community leaders who will share their experience of mobilising communities to eliminate family violence and sexual violence. We are joined by Paul Brown of Disabled Persons Assembly, Dr. Camille Nakhid from Auckland University of Technology, Marina Ieremia, the whānau Resilience Coordinator with Ko Te Pacifica Trust, Jelly O'Shea from the Intersex Trust, and Megan Spice, who is a Rainbow Community Support Worker. Firstly, I'm going to hand things over to you, Paul Brown, from the Disabled Persons Assembly.
Kia ora, e te whānau ko Paul Brown aho. I'm a policy advisor with the Disabled Persons Assembly, but more about that in a wee bit. Firstly, I think the timing's right to start by acknowledging the recent disability and mental health elements of the inquiry into abuse and state and faith-based care. Many of our members have engaged with this work. They've shared their stories with the Commission, either privately or publicly. The bravery that's been shown by disabled people over the last few weeks has been immense, and we also, of course, acknowledge those who weren't able to testify. But we will be expecting any recommendations to be followed through on. I think I want to start by describing our community a wee bit, and I think all I can really say is the disability community is diverse. It's part of every group and every section of society, and actually I think it's the only group that group of people that are part of every group and section of society. We live in really diverse settings. We have more people going in and out our homes than others. Many of us don't choose where we live, you know, but the diversity is huge, and of course disproportionate within Maori and Pacifica communities. I want to talk a wee bit about DPA and what it is. So DPA, the Disabled Persons Assembly, is a national pan-impairment organisations led by and for disabled people. 90% of our staff and 100% of our policy team, which I'm part of, are disabled. Despite high rates of violence, abuse and neglect of disabled people, we are not, we are an underserved community who have historically been either ignored or forgotten about. Disability services have generally failed to provide services to eliminate violence, abuse and neglect, often caused by their services, I would say. And the mainstream violence prevention services don't often meet our needs. Hence, DPA policy team have made work around violence and abuse our highest priority, reflected in our respective work streams. So my colleague Mojo Mathers sits on the Tāonis Tauiwi caucus as the disability portfolio rep. I'm on several advisory groups, including the Human Rights Commission's reference group on violence elimination, the online Family Violence Advisory Group, an MSD group, and the Community Advisory Group of the Disability Community Advisory Group of the Diverse Communities Project, run by colleagues including Sue Hobbs, who I know you're going to hear from over the next few days. DPA has been contracted by Te Puna Anōi to undertake outreach with our community to identify what a sustainable and enduring platform with the organisation would look like for disabled people. The first phase of interviews has with disability advocates and allies has been completed, and we've done 16 interviews so far, and we'll continue to do them for the next month or so. The next phase will move to doing wider community hui on prioritising issues around disability in the National Action Plan. Prioritising because we know what the issues are. The JV has had issues from its own disability reference group and disability community that it had outreach with during the consultation and setting up of the National Action Plan. So we know what the issues are, but we need to talk to community about prioritising them. It's too early to share findings, but we just want to acknowledge that there will be people at this hui today who'll be working with our communities that we haven't been in touch with yet. So if you are disabled and or advocating for disabled people around violence and abuse and would like to engage with this work, please get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. And I'm quite happy. I can't do it while I'm reading Braille for someone to put this in the chat, but my email address is paul.brown@dpa.org.nz, or of course you can get it from the organisers of this hui. So I'd like to leave really with three main thoughts. The first is that disabled people want system change, not individual change. It's the system that disables us, and so we want a change in the system. We won't be ignored or forgotten about anymore. That's past. And I think if for no other reason, the testimonies that was put forward in the Royal Commission make it really clear that we won't be ignored or forgotten about anymore. And I'd just like to finish by reminding you of the Disabled Persons Movement's kind of clarion call, which is nothing about us without us. We demand a seat at the table where decisions are being made about us. We are really clear that we need to be involved in co-design of services if they are to meet our needs. We push for a twin-track approach, that is specialist disability services for those who need that, but is accessible mainstream services where that is the preferred or the best option. And so we just want to remind people of the nothing about us without us, because we've been ignored and forgotten about for too long. But we think that the work that's been happening with this work with DPA and work that's been ongoing with the joint venture means that disabled people will be brought in from the cold, but our community demands that and will be pushing for that. So yeah, ka kite, remember, nothing about us without us. Cheers.
Tēnā koe, Paul. I'd just like to thank you so much for taking time to come and kōrero, share very important kōrero with us this afternoon on behalf of the Disabled Persons Assembly. Really heard your call and your demand there for inclusion, and just really appreciate what you've shared with us within this space. Nō reira, ka nui te mihi ki a koe e te rangatira. I'd now like to pass things over to you, Dr. Camille Nakhid, on behalf of ethnic communities. Ngā mihi.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Camille Nakhid, tuki ngoa. Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Te Aorerekura, Hui, for having me here. I'm going to be speaking on family violence among our ethnic communities in Aotearoa and the groups that use the A2 whānau program. And I'll also end with the family violence among our ethnic queers in Aotearoa. Now in Aotearoa, New Zealand, migration, poverty, social pressures, they all intersect and contribute to ethnic women's experiences of family violence. But the Western approaches to domestic violence have represented culture in a purely negative light, when in fact cultural practices and beliefs can serve to be protective factors for our abused women. So we must caution against family violence among ethnic communities being viewed as an attribute of a particular culture rather than as a product of male domination. And the ability of migrant and ethnic women to change their situation will require the underlying and interlinked structural conditions of isolation, sexism, and racism in Aotearoa New Zealand society to be addressed. Now, the A2 whānau family violence prevention program derives from a kaupapa Māori philosophical basis, and this program was undertaken by a number of our ethnic communities. And I will look at some of the ethnic communities that I spoke with. One with whom I have spoken, the African Muslim young women, they were aware of domestic violence and family violence in the community, but said it had not affected them on a personal level, but they were aware of the shame and the stigma that family violence brought to their families and the silence that surrounded it, which made it difficult for people to talk about it. On the other hand, African Muslim young men said they had heard about family violence and it was a problem in some communities, but not theirs. And they said, but if it did happen and someone did talk about it, it would make it worse for the family because the abuser would get more violent, the family would be stigmatized and ostracized. The Afghani women with whom I spoke said they were aware of the occurrence of family violence in their community, but no one spoke about it. And they said they acknowledged that if no one spoke about it, they did not know how serious the problem was or how it could be addressed. The Colombian women were emphatic that domestic violence was taking place in their communities and that many people had come from Latin America with particular attitudes towards women and particular attitudes towards family and sexual violence. The women said that the community needed to realize that because they came from a strong Catholic background, it did not mean that they had to endure an abusive marriage or an abusive family situation to keep the marriage intact. What the Colombian women suggested was that instead of having programs focused specifically on family and sexual violence, that there should be a general forum or workshop which discuss a number of issues, including family violence, so that families did not feel singled out or exposed by a workshop that focused purely on family and sexual violence. When I spoke with talking to our young ethnic LGBTIQ or young ethnic queers in Aotearoa. Now, that actually the research that I did with our young ethnic queers came out because of the research that I had done with our ethnic communities and was speaking with our ethnic communities. I realized the family and sexual violence harm that was being done to that is being perpetrated on our young ethnic queers. Now, the Ministry for Ethnic Communities estimates that there are about 15,000 ethnic queer young people in Aotearoa. and cultural traditions, religions, languages, and values, they hold a prominent place in the lives of ethnic community members, and they have a strong influence on the construction of identity among our ethnic young people. Now, for our young ethnic queers, gossip and rumors have played a large part in distancing them from their communities, because gossip and rumors were used by communities in sites of worship and social events, all of which rejected queer identity. And gossip and rumors were used by the community to reinforce queerness as a Western ideology, which was seeking to corrupt cultural and religious values of ethnic communities. And the fear of gossip and rumors forced our young ethnic queers to self-exclude from community, because their sexual and gender identity became a barrier to their participation in the community. It made them feel unsafe. And they were outed by these gossip and rumors, and being outed led to bullying, verbal abuse, threats of violence. Respectability politics among our ethnic communities also serve to monitor the personal lives and to police the gender of our young ethnic queers, because communities and families were using respectability politics to uphold cultural norms, to maintain oppressive structures, behaviors, attitudes around queerness. And that controlled what ethnic young people and how they led their lives. The homophobic, the homonegative attitudes of families reflected the values of many ethnic communities, and families were more concerned about the consequences on the social acceptance and status of having a queer child in their families. And the comparisons that families made between their queer child and others was subtle hostility, and it was an indirect assertion that being queer did not fulfill the expectations that the family had for them, including being married to someone of a different gender. Silencing was also a problem among our ethnic queers, because for many young ethnic queers, families were known to shun, shame, and silence them, and they had to fight to hold on to their queer identities. Their unwillingness to acknowledge and accept queerness among ethnic communities and families invalidated the lived experiences of the participants. And this lack of acknowledgement kept many young ethnic queers in the closet and exacerbated their exclusion and their cultural alienation. And this denial made them feel unaccepted and unable to be themselves. And having to hide and deny their queerness had made it difficult for them to discuss intimacy and relationships with family or to seek their advice. And many of them were faced with rejection of their sexual identities, an unwelcoming environment at home, a lack of support. They had to leave home, they were forced out of home, and many of them remained in unsafe relationships because of the silencing and negation of their queer identities. Now, what we got from the ethnic young queers, the healing responses and strategies that could help our young ethnic queers and our ethnic communities in general, is that one thing that we have to do is that even though ethnic communities may appear less accepting of queerness, when we frame these communities as homophobic, that ignores the larger social, political, and economic context in which family rejection may take place. For ethnic communities, their status as outsiders in wider Aotearoa society is not that dissimilar to that of ethnic queers within their own communities. And if ethnic communities were to recognize the harm of discrimination, that might enable them and their families to better address and advocate against all forms of discrimination related to their ethnicity. It was also shown that families would be more welcoming and tolerant of their queer children if they did not have to deal with the judgment and shameful gaze of their community. Dealing with family members and communities who might not support a gender non-conforming child might be disconcerting and unsettling. And families of queer young people need to figure out what their roles are. Government and local bodies should commit resources to community organizations and communities that work with LGBTQ+ ethnic young people and their families, because one priority is developing strategies to enable ethnic families to access services that will assist them in communicating with their queer ethnic children and for understanding information on sexualities and gender, because acceptance brings resilience. Thank you.
Kia ora, Dr. Camille. Once again, what an incredible insight into some of the very unique issues facing our ethnic communities here in Aotearoa. Thank you for sharing specifically around the ethnic women, ethnic youth, and ethnic queer communities. It seems that we still have a lot of work to do. Really appreciate the fruits that you have fed to us this afternoon. Thank you so much for your time, e te rangatira. Now to pass things over to you, Marina Ieremia, on behalf of our Pacific community.
Thank you. Kia ora nā talofa lava maloi lelei, whakalofa atu, Bulavanaka, and kia ora. Yeah, thank you. My name is Marina. If I could just give a quick background of my organisation. We're from Kōrero Pacifica Trust. We're a Pan-Pacific organisation that was created in 1999 and located in Kirikiriroa, Hamilton. Our organisation was founded on special character principles, and we continue to be grounded in faith-based principles. Our mission is improve the holistic well-being of Pacific communities. Our vision, dynamic, healthy, strong, educated, collaborative, sustainable Pacific communities living to their full potential. Expressed more simply, we have a vision of a thriving Pacific community. What makes our organisation different is that we deliver free services using the Pacific models of care. Our wraparound services are delivered, placing the family at the centre. Our services span across 5 service delivery arms: health, employment, training, whānau ora, COVID response, and social services. With regards to whānau resilience, my role is to work with ainga, kāinga, kōpū tangata, in identifying the causes for violence being used as a response to challenges they face on a daily basis, and then working alongside the ainga, kāinga, kōpū tangata to discover what they feel is needed to take their family out of the cycle of violence. My role is also to intensively walk alongside the ainga, the kāinga, kōpū tangata, for a 20 to 30 week period where in the initial assessment, the short and long-term goals are identified. I will also source the resources, advocate, negotiate, and support the ainga, the kāinga, and kōpū tangata to achieve the goals that they have identified. The aim of the program is to build strong, resilient Pasifika families and communities free of violence, where families are actively participating in championing their well-being and safety. The objectives of the program is to increase whānau resilience, increase protective factors, and break intergenerational cycles of violence. How? To develop whānau resilience by providing long-term recovery and building those coping skills to enable families to be free of violence and to prevent potential recurrences. At Kōrero Pacifica Trust, our values are based on respect, service, unity, and faith. These are all reflected in the way we engage with our ainga, kāinga, kōpū tangata, and our communities. Through these values, the wraparound services at Kōrero Pacifica are well utilised, as well as collaborating with external networks, either service-based or community-based, to assist the family to achieve the goals they have identified. In order for families to find solutions to the issue of family violence, their voices need to be heard to identify what is working, what is not working, and what needs to be implemented for their families to become resilient through life's challenges and live a happier and thriving life. I want to quickly make reference to the overarching mana collective, Te Korowai, or whānau resilience. This was developed by Precious at Parent Line here in Hamilton, and Sol, who is a former staff member here at Kōrero Pacifica, which brings together 2 cultural models called Te Atia and Leva. Leva is the sacred space in the Samoan culture. I also make reference to the Tōwhā Mamoe Samoan conceptual framework utilised to help families understand how violence impacts on lewa, and by working with the family to identify how violence sole violates lewa, what is needed to teo, which is restore harmony and peace to lewa, and how families can use the tools that they have identified with the support of the navigator to tausi, which is to nurture lewa. Through these frameworks provided is the cultural space that is critical for families to engage safely. Alofoi I nā ia mai mau whetuinai, the journey to resilience by Pacifica for Pacifica. Above all, there is no doubt the essence of building a relationship with the family is paramount. It is crucial to ensure the family can trust, embrace, are welcomed into a safe environment, to be respected, their voices heard and not judged. In conclusion, I make reference to a Samoan proverb, e fofo ele alamea le alamea. The solutions lie within our community. Kia manuia. Thank you.
My tēnā koe, Marina, thank you so much for sharing with us once again incredible insight into the reality for our Pacific community. Te moana nui a kiwa, nā tuakana no reira, tēnā koutou katoa, tēnā koe I te rangatira, Marina. We're going to hear from our last speakers in this particular session. I'd like to introduce Jelly O'Shea and Megan Spice, who are coming to us on behalf of Rainbow Violence Prevention Network. Tēnā kōrua.
Kia ora, thank you. My name is Megan and this is my colleague Jelly, and we are here to represent the Rainbow Violence Prevention Network, or commonly known as RVPN. So RVPN is a network of organisations working across both the sexual and family violence sectors, as well as the rainbow sector in Aotearoa. So when we use the term rainbow, we mean that we represent those who are transgender, non-binary, intersex, takatapui, Indigenous and non-heterosexual identities. RVPN is working to address the prevent violence through sharing expertise, developing initiatives together, and also facilitating member organisations to support and learn from each other's mahi. And we're actually located within local communities and provide a range of specialist services to those within the rainbow community who are impacted by family and sexual violence. We have quite a few member organisations, which include Inside Out, Respect Ed, Tēnā Kahukura, Intersex Aotearoa, Rainbow Youth, as well as Gender Minorities Aotearoa, Outline, Rape Prevention Education, Help Auckland, and Rainbow Path. And we're Aotearoa's leading network solely committed to rainbow violence prevention. We're a multicultural network based on the principles of te tiriti and intersectionality, and we take a collaborative approach to the mahi that we do. Our network is made up of the communities we're advocating for, so whilst we're part of this change, it's also important to note that many of us have experienced harm and violence in relation to our rainbow identities.
Kia ora, Megan. So now I'm going to describe some of the issues that we're trying to address in our work. So across our rainbow communities, the experiences of violence are very high. What underpins our network is our shared understanding and analysis of what we mean when we use the term violence. This includes colonial, structural, heteronormative, patriarchal, and institutional violence. And unfortunately, we know that people who embody multiple marginalised identities are more likely to experience further harms. So that includes our Māori, Pacifica, disabled, refugee and asylum seeking whānau, who are also part of the rainbow. To share evidence of what we know of our community's experiences daily can be difficult, as there is a lack of quality data due to the systemic exclusion of rainbow identities in surveying to date. I can speak to the Counting Ourselves report that shows that rates of sexual violence for trans and non-binary people are very high. In fact, trans women, trans men, and non-binary people reported incidences of sexual assault at 2 to 3 times higher than for women in the general population. This number was even higher for disabled transgender participants. So the New Zealand Crime and Victim Survey only measures based on diverse sexualities, so they don't pick up stats around gender and sex characteristics, which invisibilizes our trans and intersex populations. So what the survey does tell us, however, is that there's a really high risk of sexual assault for people with diverse sexualities, particularly those who identify as bisexual. So while these stats can feel overwhelming at times, there are many positive initiatives to begin to address these issues from the ground up.
So as a collective, we've been working on a range of different projects which were implemented collaboratively to address the multiple and diverse needs of our communities. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of them, not all of them. Currently, Outline is working on a rainbow violence prevention awareness campaign, which is going to be promoted nationally. And the intention behind this project is to promote and address rainbow issues to a wider audience. The next one is a project that Inside Out, Rainbow Youth and Gender Minorities Aotearoa are working on collaboratively. And that's a healthy relationship project for Rainbow Dangatahi, which will be delivered in a preventative and interventionist manner to address and respond to harm and violence within our communities. Rape Prevention Education is working on rainbow best practice guidelines for support services, which we hope will be implemented throughout the sector. And lastly, Intersex Aotearoa and Gender Minorities Aotearoa are working on the ARC project, which is assessing service gaps for trans, takatapui and intersex communities in family and sexual violence services. So these projects target the engagement of our diverse communities and reflect what they're telling us, which is then channeled into the provision of knowledge, skills and improvements so that are really desperately needed across the sector of service providers.
So we've learned a lot along the way through our collaboration, and the main thing is that we're stronger together. By working collaboratively as the RVPN, we have strengthened our practice and found strategic ways to uplift our communities' overlapping needs. By working together, we are more able to hold those systems who are not including rainbow communities to account and challenge the status quo in order for true systemic change to be made possible. Through our collaborative work, we have discovered some critically important elements that contribute to successful programs and consultations. So if you're listening to this and wanting to include the diverse needs of rainbow communities, here's a few things we can suggest. The rainbow is made up of a set of diverse groups with distinctly different needs, so it's important you first learn what these are. The work itself must be led by the affected communities. Services must be needs-based and evidence-based. It must be properly resourced and funded. As a community, we are often over-consulted and don't always get paid for the time and our expertise. If the data doesn't exist, help us discover these knowledge gaps through project creation with our communities. And of course, if you aren't sure what the first steps are, you can contact us for training and strategic guidance. We have been able to sustain our ongoing collaboration through the alignment of our kaupapa, despite the multiple systemic barriers we each face. Through our practice methods and by working on challenges together, we are confident real change will happen.
To sustain this change, we need you to support us in our work, as we know that the organisations which provide support to our communities year-round are the best places to find meaningful analysis of what is needed across the different rainbow populations. And you can be a part of this change by supporting the work that we do and implementing changes in your own organisations to reflect and uplift the real needs of rainbow communities. So if you are interested, you can check out our website, which is rvpn.nz, and we'd just like to thank you very much for listening to us today. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Tēnā kōrero, Megan, Jelly, thank you so much for sharing with us. Again, to hear the insights into some of the issues for our rainbow community, but also to hear some of the incredible mahi that you're doing in a really positive way to help to mobilise this kaupapa. So a big mihi to you both, e ngā rangatira, tēnā kōrua. We're actually left with a bit of spare time in this session, so I'm going to invite our other speakers back in, and I would like to present a question to you. Megan and Jelly have touched on this already for the rainbow community, so I thought we might begin with Paul, Marina or Camille, just to ask if perhaps they are able to share some thoughts, some whakaaro. The question is, how can we ensure responses are tailored for new migrants, rainbow communities, disabled people, and those with First. Sorry. Oh, Paul. Well, actually, would anybody like to go first? Dr. Camille, perhaps you could share with us.
That is a really, really good question. Thanks for that, because from being on the Cross Parliamentary Rainbow Coalition and other groups, I do not think resources are tailored to ethnic communities, or in particular ethnic queers. I think it's the leftovers. It's an addendum. It's let's see what the larger Pakeha queer community wants, what their policies and initiatives are, and if there's anything left over, well, then it will trickle down to ethnic queers. I think there needs to be a dedicated funding source, managed, directed, as Paul and Marina said, bias for us, for ethnic queers to deal and implement, strategize the way that works best for they and their communities.
Tēnā koe, Doctor. Thank you for sharing that. Paul, can I pass it over to you with the same question? How can we ensure responses are tailored for disabled people?
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, I think a lot of it's been said by the previous answer there, and I think it's right. Things are designed, and then somebody suddenly thinks about, what about this group or that group? And so I think for the disability community, well, first of all, my short answer is ask us. Talk to us, involve us, have us in co-design the kind of nothing about us without us issue. But I think we need to think about that separate funding stream, and then working in two ways. And I come back to us, the disability community, with a twin track approach, which is in the disability strategy, New Zealand disability strategy, which is there to implement the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And that twin track approach is that we do need specialist disability violence prevention services where that is appropriate, where violence is related and has maybe a lot of disability related issues around it. And we also need mainstream family sexual violence organisations to be accessible, and that's and inclusive. And I think just quickly, accessible means that we can get in the door physically to premises. It also means access to information, to websites, to all of that stuff. And I think the inclusive part of it means that we're supported by people who have had training and thoughts about working with disabled people, and do that in a respectful and meaningful and inclusive, mana-enhancing way.
Tēnā koe, Paul. Thank you for sharing that. Perhaps, Marina, would you have any whakaaro that you would like to add?
Yeah, kia ora. Yeah, I think it's having that cultural awareness and knowing when to apply those cultural or those healthcare models for our people. I can think of examples like the Whanawhale model and the Te Whare Tapawhā model, and using the strength-based approach, a client-centered focus, and just building that trust or that rapport with those we are dealing with, because it's their voices that we need to hear. And it's not always easy to build those relationships when they're coming from a really dark area, and it's, you know, it's known for so long it's best to keep it silent. So I think if we can work and build the trust, create a safe space, identify who's in your family circle, your whānau circle, and identify those needs and goals and the challenges and the barriers, and allowing them to tell their story and to just actively listen. I think those are really important, and to be able to reach out for them, that we're reaching out to them. Yeah.
Ka pai, tēnā koe whaia. O tira koutou katoa e nā rauranga tira, tēnā koutou. Thank you once again for bringing this very important kōrero to us around our different communities that exist in Aotearoa, who we love very, very much. Thank you, and I feel a sense of not only gratitude to you for sharing, but a sense of hope today, hearing these key messages around inclusion, around collaboration and effective engagement. So once again, thank you for the work that you do, and wishing you all the best until we see you again. Ngā mihi koutou. So back to us e te iwi. We will now take another 10-minute break, and we invite you to detach from your screens for a bit before we return back at 2:20 p.m. Ka pai, mā te wā.